Morning. We are going to talk about our 3Ps today of pencil, pressure, and placement. So when I say pencil, I mean whether or not it's a 2B, a 4B, or a 6B. So the pencil will affect the value of your shading. When I say placement, I mean where are you holding your pencil? When you're holding like this, you're going to be able to have a lot more fine motor control and put a lot more pressure, which is our third P. When you're holding the pencil more down the middle of the barrel or at the end, you have less motor control and a lighter pressure. So those two kind of go hand in hand. So if I refer to the 3Ps, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I've already got my picture mapped out. You can see my measurements here. This is 10 inches. And I've marked off 1-inch increments. I just used the width of the ruler. And what we are creating today is a value scale. And our ultimate goal is for each of these rectangles to be slightly different in value than the other. And you recall value is the lightness or darkness of an area or object. And that's ultimately going to be what helps something to look 3D, is if it has a full range of value. I like to start in the middle of my value scale typically when I shade. But first I'm going to show you. 2B is typically going to be your lighter values down 1, 2, 3. Your 4B is going to be more in the middle of your value scale. And then your 6B is going to be your darker values. Because you remember the 6B has a softer, darker lead, so it's going to be a richer value. Can you use your 2B down here? Of course you can. Your 4B down here? Yes. You just are going to want to be careful with your 6B down in the lighter values because it's going to get really dark really quickly. I'm going to start out in the middle with my 4B, and you'll notice that I have my pencil. Actually, I want to shade on this one. I'm going to swap papers here. I'm going to have my pencil in the 5-6 range, and you see I'm holding the very end of my pencil so I get a very light pressure. And I like to kind of start shading across all of my blocks at once because that helps me to have transitions between the values. I'm really thinking about staying light down here because that 1 is not totally white. It does have a little bit of value. Starting to press a little bit hard. I'm going to change my placement so I can press a little bit harder. And you notice that I'm shading all in one direction. That's going to be good craftsmanship, to shade all in one direction. We really don't want to see those pencil strokes too much going every which way. That is a valid shading technique to have texture with hatching and cross hatching, but right now we're just going to go for smooth transitions, and we want to try to fill up the entire block. I'm going to switch over to my 6B now and start building up some of my light values. You notice that you see kind of a fuzzy look. That's the tooth of the paper, the texture of the paper starting to show through. And you notice they're all kind of looking the same right now. That's because of optical mixing, where our eyes are kind of slowly filling in the gray and the white to see one value being darker than the other or whatever. Now notice that I'm starting to go in a little bit of an opposite direction down here in my 10. We want to slowly build up these layers. And I can go in opposite directions with the 8, 9, 10s because the lead is very, very soft and we're not going to see the scratchiness of the line quality as much. So I'm kind of starting to fill that in a little bit more, and then I'm going to bring my value down again. And again, I'm kind of going horizontal now. It's a different directionality. But once I get into this area, I'm going to stay consistent and go with the diagonal. Just trying to build up the value. And we're going to pause for a minute. Yep. All right, we're back. You can see I've done a little bit more shading now. And again, our goal is for each of these rectangles to look slightly different from the other so that we have a full range, 1 through 10. So if you're looking kind of at my value scale here, which is a little bit different because it's a photocopy, but One, you need to be kind of cautious about where you're placing your hand as you're shading, because you can see you start to get this little nice smudge, and that can get all over your paper and really mess with your shading and your craftsmanship. If you struggle and you're kind of squinting your eyes and you're saying, you know what, this 5 and 6 kind of looks really similar, I really want you to go back in and with your 4B, because it's a softer lead, kind of do some littler circles and try to focus on some of those areas of white, especially along the area where the 5 and 6 line touch. So you can kind of start seeing that those are now looking a little bit more different from one another. I will say that your Magic Rub eraser does tend to smear a little bit more, so I'm going to allow you guys to borrow some of my kneaded erasers, which actually are very stretchy, and they're really good at lightening a value by using it as a stamp. Okay, you can see I'm stamping that one to get it a little bit lighter. When you use a kneaded eraser, it doesn't mean just lighten it and not go back. You do still need to kind of go back with your pencil and try to disguise where you've used the stamping method. Okay, we're going to go on to the parts of a sphere. You can see I already have my sphere, my circle, traced out, and I just used the inside of a tape roll. The first thing you need to do is decide where the light source is coming. So I'm going to write light source. And as the light travels around the sphere, if you line up your pencil right here, the light source will tell you where the cast shadow is going to be. So I've got it in a diagonal line here, and I know that my cast shadow then will be on this side. You can see it's just kind of a slight oval. I'm not drawing it in too dark right now. Also, with the light source, it's going to tell us where our reflected light is. It's going to be a tiny little crescent at the bottom, because the light is not only hitting the sphere and hitting the table that it's sitting on, that light will then bounce back in and reflect into the sphere. Now, as you're shading a sphere, it's important for you guys to think about directional shading. You can see I'm kind of moving my hand in kind of a circular motion, and I'm twisting my paper. We don't want our sphere to look stripy or like a pool ball. We don't want to have defined lines. So I'm kind of starting to just develop that directional shading here. I'm going to start getting a little bit darker on the edges and lightening up towards the middle. It's almost like you're taking your value scale and bending it. So my lightest value is going to be at the top of the sphere, and my darkest value is going to be at the bottom, but it goes all the way around. So I'm going to have dark values on the side. My values are going to wrap up the side here. We're going to take a quick pause for me to catch up with my shading, and then we'll revisit it. All right, and we're back. You can see I've done a little bit more shading to my sphere. I'm really focusing on trying to blend out my values, because again, I don't want it to look stripy, but yet I want to make sure that I'm getting a full range of value. So I'm kind of carefully adjusting my pressure and my placement, going up the sides. I am shading in a little bit different direction because I am using my 6B. It's safe to go opposite directions with your 4 or your 6 because you're not going to get that scratchy line quality. You notice I'm starting to indicate my reflected light. It is not highly outlined. It's not like an oval or an ellipse that's just really defined. It's very subtle. I'm going to kind of make the value a little bit darker right above it. Go back in just a little bit. You can see my cast shadow touches right against the reflected light, and it's going to be darkest, or cast shadow will be darkest nearest to the sphere because it's furthest away from the light, and as it goes out, it is going to get a little bit lighter. I'm kind of rushing a little bit here, but you guys get the idea. It's going to be maybe from like a value of 10 to maybe a value of 7, kind of fading out. And again, if you feel like you have too defined of a shape up here, you can always use your kneaded eraser to kind of stamp out just a little bit. But anytime we use that kneaded eraser, we need to go back in with our pencil and kind of smooth out, because it does leave a little bit of a different texture to the paper. Okay, so we've got our light source. Right here is going to be our attached shadow. This will be our reflected light and our cast shadow. Okay, and you notice I've got a few smears because I was laying my hand across the sphere. You can take a different piece of paper and kind of cover it up to help protect, but before I would turn this in, I would definitely go back and kind of clean it up just a little bit, clean up some of those smears, and then you'll be done.